Good morning, everybody. I'm speaking to you on Sunday, January 24th, and today I'm going to be presenting our 10th lecture. Before we get to that, just a few things. I know this week we continue to drive. I believe this is Group A week, okay, so make sure you're aware of the schedule. Next weekend, I will be presenting the final lecture for this part of the course. And then the following weekend, I will be giving you a final exam. Okay, and I will talk more about that as we get closer. As far as assignments are concerned, most of you have been pretty good. There are some of you that are either a little behind or way behind. And listen, if you're not doing your assignments, you're not going to get your certificate. And it means if you're missing one, you're not getting your certificate, okay? So if you owe assignments, I really don't know what you're waiting for, but you need to get moving. Because if we get to the middle of February and you're owing me stuff, you're going to have a problem, okay? So please keep that in mind. As far as the driving situation, I know that groups are at different points. You know, I think that if you're driving with Guido, you're probably, pretty much on schedule. And if you're driving with Tim through no fault of his own, you may have fell behind a bit. Tim has had a few things he's had to deal with, but I think he's back on track. So we're looking at making sure that all of you complete your lessons, and we are shooting for 8 lessons total by the end of February. Now, my situation is such that I was finally physically able to get back in the car, and then last Sunday, my son tested positive for COVID. He's fine. My wife and I are fine, but of course I'm in quarantine. And I'll be in quarantine now for another 3 or 4 days, which means I can't get back into the driver's ed car until the end of this upcoming week. But my plan is, if everything goes according to plan, my plan is by the end of this week coming up, I would like to help Tim to make up time that some of you need. So Tim and I might have a third instructor as well, a gentleman by the name of Frank, who's excellent. He may be helping us as well. My point is that if you're behind in your lessons, and I know some of you are, we're all going to work together to make sure that you get all the instruction that you're supposed to get, that you're on target to finish the course by the end of February, and therefore get your completion certificate. The last thing on this is that you cannot schedule your road test until you have the number that appears on your certificate, okay? So I'm sorry if there are those of you who really want to get a jump on this, but there's just no way around that. When you get your certificate, there's a number on it, and you'll be able to use that number to schedule your road test. And as we get closer, I'll talk more about that, okay? If you remember 2 weeks ago, I left off that last lecture with telling you that I would like to talk about parking in the next lecture. So let me just start with that briefly, okay? You learn more about parking and K-turns in the car than you're going to learn from anything that I have to say. Parking seems to be the thing that, students stress over the most, and it's understandable. I don't think parking is as easy as the K-turn, okay? But, I do want to emphasize that instructors, there's no one way to do a parallel park correctly. So if I'm teaching you how to parallel park, I may have a different approach than Tim or Guido, okay? We use what works for us, but we certainly don't want to teach you incorrectly. But my point again is that, there's no one fixed way to teach parallel parking. I'll tell you how I teach it very briefly. Basically what I do is we line up our car next to the car that you're parking behind. And I always tell students, line up your right side view mirror to the front door handle of that car. And give yourself about 3 feet between you and the car that you pulled up next to. Make sure you signal before you start pulling over. You signal right, you pull up next to the car, you line up your right side mirror to the front door handle of the car you're parking behind. Give yourself about 3 feet. Okay, so now you're in position to begin. They should not, on the road test, be asking you to park between two cars. They should be giving you a situation where you have all the space behind you. And the reason is they don't want to run the risk, obviously, of, having you hit the car behind you. So they're more than likely going to have you do this with all that space, which is good. It's good news, okay? So now you're in position. Now I tell students, I always say gear before steer, because inevitably a student forgets to change gear, and then we have the potential for disaster. And if you're in the wrong gear and you're moving the car, you're going to fail the road tests, okay? So if you think gear before steer, both with the park and the K-turn, that should help you, especially if you're nervous. That should help you make sure you're in the correct gear. I mean, I've had students in a practice, I give a practice road test, and I say to the student, okay, let's begin, pull away from the curb, and they signal and they're ready to go, and they don't even put it into drive. They hit their gas pedal and the car's not going anywhere. And if that happens on your road test, that's the end of the road test. You don't even get on the road. So as far as your parking is concerned, so now you're lined up, gear before steer. So you put your car in reverse. Now, I like to tell students to set the wheel before you move the car, okay? Again, not everybody teaches it this way, but I'm just sharing with you how I teach it, just to give you tools that you can use. So I tell students at this point, turn the wheel all the way to the right, and then cut it back just until it's centered. So you cut it back just 1/4 of a revolution. So you turn all the way to the right and cut back 1/4 of a revolution. Your wheel is now in position for you to back up. Understand, this gives you a nice angle when you back up. By the way, we're turning to the right because we're backing up to the right. Now we're in reverse, so we turn right. If we had turned the wheel left, we'd be going that way. And of course, we don't want to do that. So you've turned the wheel all the way to the right. I tell students, cut it back so you have a nice angle. If you don't cut the wheel back, when you back into the spot, if this is the parked car and this is me, you're going to end up like that. But by cutting the wheel back, you give yourself a nice angle. Now, before you start backing up, I tell students to signal right. So anybody who's coming can see the signal and know that you're going to be backing up to the right. Before you move the car, the very last step you need is to check your side view mirror and look over your left shoulder to check your blind spot. And we do that because when you back into the spot, the front of your car is swinging into the lane. If a car is coming, that can be very dangerous. So checking that blind spot is extremely important. Okay? So then we back up. And as we're backing up, we need to be looking in the direction we're going. If your car has a backup camera, they will cover it, or you'll be asked to cover it. Okay? So, pretend it's not there. There's no backup camera. Both hands on the wheel. You can turn your body and your head like this, and you're looking out the back window. Now, as I'm backing up very slowly. So I'm just lifting my foot up off the brake. I'm looking behind me. But I'm also glancing forward. I should say more to the side, because what I tell students is back up until your side view mirror is just a little bit behind the back left corner of the car you're parking behind. Okay, so your right side view mirror, just a little behind the back bumper, okay, is a rough focal point. Then you stop. Now what I do is keep my foot on the brake and I turn my wheel all the way to the left. I don't cut back this time. Now I keep my wheel in that position. You're turning to the left because now you're going to want the back of your car to swing left, right? Again, look behind you, back up nice and slow, glance forward. See how my head is moving? You're glancing forward so you see when your car is aligned evenly with the car in front of you, you stop. Okay? Now, it takes some practice, okay? Basically, I just outlined some steps. Again, this is how I've taught it over the years, had a lot of success with it. Tim may be teaching it differently. Guido may be teaching it differently, okay? All are correct, and, you have to practice. You have to use whichever, on your road test, you want to be confident enough that you know the steps and, you can do this. And when you finish, I tell students, certainly no more than a foot from the curb, hopefully less than that, okay? You don't want to hit the curb. That's considered an automatic failure. But when you're backing up, back up very slowly. So that way, in the event that you do, unfortunately, hit the curb, you just brush it and you might get away with it, okay? Now, once your car is lined up where you want it to be, center your wheel. Once your wheel is centered, put your car in park. And we put our car in park because that tells the examiner that we're done with the park. You don't say, I'm finished, okay? You center your wheel and you throw your car in park, and you wait for the examiner now to give you any further instruction, okay? That tells the examiner that you're done. He or she might open the door and look at the curb. Usually they don't. They know whether you're in a good spot or not. So basically that's how I teach it, okay? So just for your own reference, you can know that. Now today we want to talk about the effects of alcohol and drugs on driving. That's the topic of today's lecture. And mainly alcohol, but we are at the end going to talk a little bit about other drugs, particularly marijuana, okay? The first thing I would mention by way of a statistic is a statement that indicates that half of all drivers admit to occasionally drinking and driving. They admit to occasionally, at least, driving after they've been drinking, okay? So it's a very common thing. That's unfortunate. The reality is that even if you are not drunk, you should never drive if you've had any alcohol. Because once you take a sip of alcohol, the impairment process starts to take place and you become less effective as a driver and more dangerous as a driver. So you may not be legally drunk, but you should not be driving if you've had even a taste of an alcoholic drink. First, I emphasize something you all know, that drinking alcohol is illegal in all 50 states in this country if you're under 21, okay? And all of you are under 21. So it's my hope and prayer that you're not drinking. Forget about driving, just drinking in general, all right? So, that's the first thing, okay, that we emphasize. And again, I emphasize that anyone who has been drinking at all, you had one sip of a drink, you should not be driving. Another statistic that's interesting and sobering, no pun intended, is that each year in this country, 17,000 people die in alcohol-related accidents. 17,000 a year in alcohol-related accidents. And 1 million people in this country per year are injured in alcohol-related accidents. So 17,000 die, 1 million injured. Again, that's a pretty staggering statistic. Half of the people who are killed, half of that 17,000, were not the ones drinking. Okay, they were passengers in the car, or, they were in another car where a driver in another car caused the accident. In other words, half of them were not the ones drinking and driving. Okay? And another statistic, 3 out of 10 Americans can expect to be in an alcohol-related accident in their lifetimes. Okay, so 1/3, basically, of all people can expect at least once in your lifetime to be in an alcohol-related accident. And hopefully, if you're in that 1/3, it's not anything serious. But it's a statistic like the others that I think really make you think. Okay? So, in light of that, I'd like to give you a scenario, several scenarios actually, just to give you an idea of how alcohol affects us. So we're using as our benchmark in this next exercise a 150-pound male, okay, who is over 21, or 21 and over, I should say. So he's drinking legally. He's 150 pounds. So a 150-pound male who is drinking. And for every drink he has, the chances, if he's going to drive, the chances of him having an accident increase for every drink that he has. So, just to give you an idea, This 150-pound male, 21 or older, has 1 to 2 drinks and then jumps in the car and drives, the chances of him having an accident nearly double. This same 150-pound male, 21 or older, has 3 to 4 drinks, and the chances of him having an accident increase by 3 to 7 times. This same 150-pound male has 5 to 6 drinks. The chances of having an accident increase 13 to 20 times. And we'll take it one step further. This same 150-pound male, 21 or older, has 7 to 8 drinks, and his chances of having an accident increase 55 to 85 times. I'm going to run through that real quick one more time. So you have a 150-pound male who is 21 years old or older. He has 1 to 2 drinks. He gets in the car and drives. The chances of him having an accident nearly double. He has 3 to 4 drinks. The chances of him having an accident increase by 3 to 7 times. He has 5 to 6 drinks. The chances of having an accident increase 13 to 20 times. And finally, 7 to 8 drinks, chances increase 55 to 85 times than if he were sober. Okay, which I think that, looking at those odds and thinking about that scenario really helps to put into perspective how powerfully alcohol affects us, and how, again, if we have 1 drink, we shouldn't be driving because your chances of having an accident nearly double. Okay? The added risk is for young drivers. So if you're drinking under the age of 21, which of course you shouldn't be, and you get into the car and start driving, understand the impact on you is going to be greater than on me. Partly because perhaps your mind is still developing. At the age of 18, your mind is still maturing. Okay, so alcohol will affect you differently than it will affect someone older. And partly because you lack experience. So remember, experience is what really makes you a good driver. And so if you're drinking and you're adding that to the fact that you're inexperienced, well, you're just magnifying the risk. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now, there's something called BAC. It's abbreviated capital BAC, and that's your blood alcohol concentration. So, of course, that's the amount of alcohol that's in your bloodstream. Okay? And I want to talk about that a little bit. The key number when it comes to blood alcohol concentration that I want you to just keep in mind is 0.08. In most states in this country, if you have a blood alcohol concentration of 0.08, then you are considered legally drunk. Okay? And of course, that's where you have, if you get pulled over, you end up losing your license. You may end up going to jail, having to pay a fine. It's 0.08, that's the benchmark. Now, again, remember, I can't emphasize enough that any amount of alcohol impairs your ability to drive a car. But 0.08 is what the law uses as the benchmark in most states for being legally drunk. So if we consider young people like yourself and people I'm talking about people within the age range of 16 to 19, okay? Let's go through some odds with that, just as we did with the 150-pound male and the amount of drinks that you consume. Let's put now this into the context of, number 1, you're a teenager. Number 2, the blood alcohol concentration. So if you have a BAC of 0.02 to 0.05, which means you've had 1 or 2 drinks and you're 16 to 19 years old, you're at least 7 times more likely to be killed in a crash than a sober driver. 7 times more likely to be killed in a crash than a sober driver if you're between the ages, and again, that's what we're looking at, people your age, 16 to 19, and you have had 1 or 2 drinks. That means your blood alcohol concentration is probably somewhere between 0.02 and 0.05. Now, let's suppose that age group, your age group, you've now had 3 to 4 drinks. And that would put you probably in that range that number that I mentioned, the 0.08 number, you're legally drunk. You are 40 times more likely to be killed in a crash than a sober driver. Okay? And you're 20 times more likely, with that same BAC, to be killed in a crash than somebody who is 55 years old, about my age. All right? 20 times. So again, going back to how your mind is still developing, going back to the importance of experience, the same blood alcohol concentration for you versus for me has a more significant impact on you. And finally, just to give ourselves perspective, if you have a blood alcohol concentration of 0.12, so you're well over the drunk number, which means you've had about 4 to 6 drinks, you are 90 times more likely to be killed in a car accident than a sober driver. So real quick, you're in the age 16 to 19. You have a blood alcohol concentration of 0.02 to 0.05, meaning you've had 1 to 2 drinks. You're at least 7 times more likely to be killed in a crash than a sober driver. At 0.08, 3 to 4 drinks, you're 40 times more likely to be killed than a sober driver, and 20 times more likely than a 55-year-old driver with the same BAC. And finally, at 0.12, you've had 4 to 6 drinks. You are 90 times more likely to be killed in a crash than a sober driver. If these numbers don't impress you in a scary way, they should, okay? Because they really tell a lot about how dangerous it is to drink and drive. And a lot of this you've learned in your health class. So, for instance, when we talk about alcohol and how it affects the body and driving ability, I think, some of this is a review of what you learned in health. Let's state a few things about alcohol. First of all, it contains a gas known as ethanol. And ethanol is a clear, odorless depressant drug, or at least it causes the drink to be, a depressant drug, okay? And what it does when you consume alcohol, which contains this ethanol, it basically slows down and impairs your central nervous system, okay? Alcohol is quickly and directly absorbed into your bloodstream. So one drink and it's already in there. The absorption of alcohol is slowed by food in the stomach. But that doesn't mean it doesn't get into your blood. It does. So let me emphasize that. Some people are under the misguided impression that if you're drinking with a full stomach, you're less likely to get drunk. And that's not true. The amount of alcohol that you consume will get into your bloodstream. It may be slowed a little bit by the fact that there is food in your stomach, so the fluids in your stomach from the food may slow down the process, but it will still happen, okay? And ultimately, as the food gets into your stomach, the alcohol moves most quickly to your brain. It goes right to your brain through the bloodstream. So immediately, your central nervous system is affected. Okay, and so the brain is the first part of the body that's affected, and particularly the part of the brain that allows you to think clearly and make good decisions. It impairs your judgment, and oftentimes the drinker himself or herself doesn't realize that it's impairing your judgment. Okay? And of course, it affects the part of the brain that controls your social inhibitions. And all of this starts with one drink. So as I said before, a lot of times the person who's drinking doesn't notice it. And that's why, you have these stories of people who wake up the next day, they don't remember what they said and did, or they have hazy memories because they weren't aware of the effect. Okay? The second part of the body that is affected by alcohol, first the brain, secondly your muscle control. Particularly certain muscles. So for instance, the muscles in your eyes, which affect your vision, are impacted by the alcohol. So there are certain aspects of your vision that are affected. Number one, acuity, A-C-U-I-T-Y, which is sharpness of vision. Number two, peripheral vision, which is the side vision. Number three, color distinction. Number four, night vision. Number five, distance judgment. And number six, focus, your ability to focus with your eyes. So again, alcohol affects your muscles. And first and foremost, it affects the muscles in your eyes, which affects, therefore, your vision. The acuity and sharpness, or sharpness of your vision, the peripheral side vision, color distinction, night vision, distance judgment, and focus. Okay? And other things, of course, that are signs, not just obviously, your impaired vision, but signs that, you're impaired loss of balance, slurred speech. Those are two very prominent physical symptoms. Now, again, let's go through an exercise where we go back to that 150-pound male and we go through each drink. We're going to take you through how many drinks this young man consumes, okay? So, he consumes one drink. And immediately after that one drink, and this applies to anybody. I mean, we're going to talk about factors that affect how how quickly your blood alcohol is raised, okay? But, in particular, if we're using this 150-pound male as our benchmark, one drink, inhibitions are immediately lowered. He or she becomes less critical of himself or others. Coordination may be affected after one drink. And after one drink, your blood alcohol level is typically between 0.02 and 0.03%. After two drinks, your reaction time begins to slow down. The person appears to be more relaxed and friendly. And your blood alcohol concentration after two is typically between 0.04 and 0.05. After three drinks, your judgment is no longer sound. The person does not necessarily think clearly. After three drinks, you may possibly do rude or unreasonable things. Your reasoning becomes less reliable, and your reaction time slows down even more. And after three drinks, an average-sized person, your blood alcohol concentration is typically 0.06 to 0.07. Okay, so you're just under that legally drunk number. After four drinks is when you're typically considered to be drunk. Your blood alcohol concentration after four drinks is typically between 0.08 and 0.09. And things that are affected, hearing, speech, vision, and balance are all affected. You may have difficulty pronouncing words. Your eye muscles become much more relaxed, and so focusing in traffic and tracking as a driver becomes much more difficult. And your reaction time is greatly slowed. Okay? After five drinks, you have a blood alcohol concentration between 0.10 and 0.11. So now you're above the legally defined drunk limit. Most of your behaviors at this point after five drinks are affected. Your body parts typically don't work well together. Your speech may be slurred. Any task requiring use of your hands and your feet, so of course driving is primary there, is affected, okay? Becomes very difficult. And walking without stumbling becomes very difficult. And finally, after 12 drinks, and I jump from 5 to 12 because, the range just goes up and up, but we're going to take it now to, what would be probably the maximum effect, which is about 12 drinks for a 150-pound male. Your blood alcohol concentration is between 0.3 and 0.4. Okay, so now you're basically, 3 times the legal limit. Okay, So now you're in a deep sleep or a coma. That's not unusual. This is when people pass out. Okay? Your blood alcohol, understand your blood alcohol concentration can continue to rise while you sleep. So to say sleep it off is not entirely true. I mean, you may, depending again how quickly you drink these 12 drinks, but, if you fall asleep, I don't want you to think that the alcohol concentration stops being absorbed. It continues to absorb to whatever level it's going to get to, whether you're asleep or awake. Okay? And typically, point 4 is the point, which is, again, after 12 or more drinks. In that area is when you start to get into the range where, this is where people die because they've had too much alcohol. And yes, I know you know this. If you drink too much alcohol, you could kill yourself if you consume too much. Okay? Now, let's talk a little bit about typical beverages and the alcohol content in each. We'll start, the 3 that I want to look at are beer, wine, and whiskey. And the reason for whiskey is because whiskey is, hard liquor, okay? It's, in the category of, the mixed drinks, the rum, okay, the vodka, all of that category of very hard liquor, versus beer and wine, which is not as concentrated in alcohol. So we're going to look at beer, wine, and whiskey. We'll start with beer. So one portion of beer, so one can of beer or one bottle of beer, is about 12 ounces. And that 12 ounces typically contains about 4.8% pure alcohol. Okay? So again, everything is relative to the other thing. But a 12-ounce beer typically has 4.8% pure alcohol. A glass of wine is typically 4 ounces. So one wine drink has about 12% alcohol. 4 ounces, 12%. So wine is somewhat stronger than beer. And then we get to the hard liquor, which is, in this case, we'll use whiskey as a reference point. And usually the one dose of hard liquor is typically, we call it a shot, right? And if you have a shot, that's 1 ounce of whiskey. And you should know with hard liquor, like whiskey and vodka, for instance, you have what's called proof. And so if a hard liquor is a certain proof, the amount of alcohol in that liquor is half what the proof is. So if a vodka is, say, or whiskey, say, is 100 proof, that means there's 50% alcohol in it. Okay? So we go by half. So typically one shot of whiskey, which is 1 ounce, has, the average whiskey is about 80 proof. So meaning you drink a shot of whiskey and what you've consumed is 40% alcohol. 80 proof, 40% alcohol. So this gives you, some idea, some reference point as far as some of the different types of alcohol, okay, that I think it's helpful to be aware of. Now, there are factors that affect your BAC. Not everybody gets drunk at the same rate. Not everybody, I could have 10 drinks and the person next to me could have 10 drinks and my BAC may differ a bit from his, okay, for a variety of reasons. So, keep that in mind. And some of the factors that affect BAC, first is gender. And alcohol does affect females more powerfully than males. Okay, the effects of alcohol on females are stronger and longer than the effect on males. So, you take your average female and your average male and they consume the same amount of alcohol in the same amount of time. Typically, statistically, that alcohol is going to affect the female more powerfully than it will affect the male. And the main reason for that, the biological reason, is that females produce smaller amounts of what's called alcohol dehydrogenase. Alcohol dehydrogenase, DEHYDROGENASE. Genase. I'll repeat that. Alcohol dehydrogenase, Dehydrogenase. Alcohol dehydrogenase is an enzyme that the body produces which breaks down the alcohol. Okay? And for women, that enzyme is not produced in the same amounts as men. It's produced much more in men than it is women. So gender affects the blood alcohol concentration. Body weight affects the blood alcohol concentration because a bigger person has more fluids in his or her body. And those fluids mix with the alcohol, and therefore the BAC may be less if you consume the same amount as somebody who's smaller. So, that idea that, a bigger person may be able to handle his or her alcohol better than a smaller person is true, okay? Because the blood alcohol concentration with a bigger person, the alcohol gets in the body and tends to mix. There's more fluids with a bigger person, so the BAC may be affected. Of course, the strength of the drink, the size of the drink. We said before, food in your stomach will slow the process. But again, all of that alcohol does eventually, with all of these, it does eventually get into your bloodstream, okay? With food, with the other factors, the degree to which it gets in your bloodstream varies, again, based on gender, body weight. But with food, it definitely gets there. It just takes longer to get there. And of course, the time that you spend drinking. So, of course, the faster you drink, the more quickly your BAC is going to reach the level that it's headed towards, right? So time is, of course, an important factor. Now, alcohol, once it's in our bodies, it at some point is eliminated. And there are 3 ways in which alcohol is eliminated from our bodies. The first 2 are very minor. It's the third one that's the biggie. So for instance, number 1, your breath. 8% of alcohol, 8% is removed from your breath, from breathing. And that's why, we detect alcohol on people's breath, because your lungs are emitting the alcohol, okay? Sweat eliminates 2% of the alcohol. Sometimes you can detect the smell of alcohol on somebody's body, and that's because the sweat that's being emitted is getting rid of a very small amount of that alcohol. So 8% breath, 2% sweat, and the remaining 90% is through a process called oxidation. And oxidation occurs with the liver, and your liver, in the process of oxidation, burns up the alcohol in your body. So 90% of your alcohol is burnt up, is eliminated through oxidation, which is the process that is occurring with your liver. And that's why, people who are alcoholics, people who drink over a long period of time, they drink a lot, it's their liver that's typically the organ that is most affected, and they get what's called cirrhosis of the liver. Many times, it's fatal. Many times it requires a liver transplant, okay? The liver is the thing most affected, all right, because of the oxidation process. Understand the only thing that can sober you, and I need to repeat this, I need to emphasize this, the only thing that will make you sober is time, okay? It is a myth that coffee sobers you up, that exercise sobers you up, that a cold shower sobers you up. And the myth is perpetuated by the fact that when you're drunk, if you have a cup of coffee, the caffeine fools you, makes you think that you're more alert. You have a cold shower, makes you feel like you're more awake. You're out in cool air and you're exercising, makes you feel like you're more alert. But that's a deception. You're still just as drunk as you would be if you didn't take the shower or drink the coffee or do the exercise. It's only time that eliminates the alcohol, or that enables the elimination process, which enables you to become sober. And just as a benchmark, it takes the average person 1¼ to 1½ hours, or longer in some cases, for the body to eliminate the alcohol contained in one standard-sized drink. So for every drink you consume, it takes you 1½ it could be 1¼ okay, an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and 30 minutes for that one drink to be eliminated. So I'll use myself as an example, and again, I'm not saying you should do this because number one, you're under 21, but number two, even when you're over 21, this is not a good thing to do. The benchmark that we use is that anytime you consume alcohol, it's advisable that you don't drive, period. But if let's say I'm at a wedding and I'm driving, the first line of attack is with my wife because she typically doesn't drink. So, she would typically drive. And I don't drink a lot, okay? But if I have a drink, I gauge it. If I know that I'm driving and I have one drink early in the night, I understand that it's going to take about an hour and a half for that drink to leave my system, okay? So, if I'm having 2 drinks, it's 3 hours. So I have to gauge that so I know how long it's going to be before I drive, okay? Which is smart, but not nearly as smart as not drinking at all. And so the thing about alcohol is that it gets into your bloodstream quickly, but it leaves slowly, okay? And any amount of alcohol impairs you. So, if you are drinking, and this is not just for driving, but just general advice, and I'm not naive, I think some of you will go to college, and you will be drinking at an age under 21, and I hope that you aren't, okay? But whether it's then or whether it's later in your life, you decide to drink, there are certain things that you want to be aware of that basically fall under the category of control drinking. So if you are going to drink, these are things that enable you to make sure that you're careful, okay? First of all, it's not even on this list, but, if whether you're drinking Coca-Cola or whether you're drinking, rum and Coke, whatever it is that you're drinking, make sure that you're not leaving that drink unattended, ever, okay? And you hear all these stories about things that are put into people's drinks, and so, you want to be smart. Make sure that drink is always in your hand. Number one, know your limit. As you know, people, that their limits vary based on gender, based on body size, based on how quickly you're drinking. So number two, you want to drink slowly. Number three, set a limit in advance. So before you go to the party, I'm going to have 2 drinks. Okay, you set your own limit. Number 4, don't try to keep pace with others. You play these drinking games and you try to keep pace with other people, and it's just stupid, okay, because other people are different than you. Number 5, make sure you're aware of signs. When you feel the effect of the alcohol starting to hit you, you want to be aware of that and you want to stop, okay? There are other things you want to consider too. Number 6, consider your mood, your physical health, and of course, consider any medications you're taking, whether prescription or over the counter. There's something called a synergistic effect, SYNERGISTIC. I'll repeat that, synergistic, SYNERGISTIC. Synergistic effect means the effect that is created by the mixing process. So if you're on a prescription medication of some sort and you're drinking, the effects on you could be more pronounced and could be different than if you were just drinking, okay? The two together could create what's called a synergistic effect, and it's important, very important, that you keep that in mind, okay? Your mood could affect how the alcohol impacts you, and of course your physical health. If you're just getting over a cold or a flu, the alcohol's effect may be more pronounced. One common sense piece of advice also, if you're going to drink at a party, Have your friends watch you, look out for you. They will notice things perhaps that you won't. And again, time. You don't want to drink too quickly. It's 1.25 to 1.5 hours per drink. And again, I am saying this for when you are over 21, and you want to drink. Hopefully, you will not be drinking prior to the age of 21 because it's illegal, okay? And the effects on you will be more pronounced, okay? Some of you will never drink. That's great. Hopefully there's more of you than those who will. But if you are going to drink when you're 21 and older, these are some pieces of advice, okay? And if, as a friend, I would say that, you're looking out for your friend who's drinking, all right? You want to be a real friend. You want to look out for that person, okay? Know what the signs are. Know what you're seeing in front of you. If you're a host, and please understand that hosts are responsible, legally, okay, as well as morally. You have somebody in your house who's drinking and they're going to drive, and then they drive and get into an accident, then you share responsibility because you were serving that alcohol at your house, okay? So you have people over your house, control the supply. Make sure you know what the signs are. Offer alternative beverages. It's not just alcohol, okay? Use standard amounts. Don't spike the drinks with more alcohol than you normally would have. Space the serving of the drinks, okay? One thing you should never do is pass a bottle, because when you pass the bottle around, it encourages people to drink who might not otherwise, or it encourages them to drink more or more quickly. So don't do it. So you have a responsibility as a friend and as a host. Alternatives to drinking and driving: number one, stay home, okay? If you are going to go out and drink, designated driver is always the way to go. Assuming this is a person you trust, and assuming the designated driver has 0 alcohol, okay? You might plan to stay overnight. Call someone for a ride, call an Uber, whatever. But you just have 1 sip of alcohol, don't drive, period. Some other things that could impact how alcohol affects you: temporary illnesses. You may have hay fever, and the alcohol is affected by that. It's allergy time. You may be a diabetic and you have to take insulin. That's going to affect you. You might have a toothache or a headache. That could affect you, okay, your mental state. As we said, other drugs and drinking, other drugs alone, okay? But when you combine other drugs with alcohol, you could have the synergistic effect that I talked about. But other drugs, forget about alcohol for a moment. Any drug that you put into your body could impact your ability to operate a motor vehicle. So whether it's prescription medication, whether it's over-the-counter medication, you need to be very careful. And, the 2 main effects that a lot of these drugs have on you, and again, I'm not even talking about alcohol at the moment, is whether it's a stimulant or a depressant. And you learned in your health class that obviously stimulants speed you up, okay? Depressants slow you down, make you more lethargic. The most common types of stimulants and depressants that, the terminology that we use, scientific terminology, is the amphetamine and the barbiturate. The amphetamine effect speeds you up. The barbiturate effect slows you down. And as we said with alcohol, it's typically the barbiturate effect. We're going to take just a little time talking about the most commonly used illegal, in some cases it's not illegal anymore, drug, which is marijuana. First of all, we want to know that, like alcohol, marijuana affects different people in different ways. It is a mild hallucinogen, so keep that in mind. If you're smoking marijuana, it's possible you could hallucinate. The interesting thing about marijuana is that it's hard to pigeonhole one category because it affects different people in so many different ways. So for instance, marijuana can have a stimulant effect, or it can have a depressant effect, either or, okay? And whether it's a stimulant or depressant could be determined by the strength of the drug, by the user's mood, or by the person's experience with the drug. Oftentimes, marijuana does make you drowsy, and so therefore it affects your judgment. It is a myth that smoking marijuana is okay if you're going to drive. It's not okay, okay? And again, because it has an effect on you, more often than not depressant, but it also can be stimulant. It affects your judgment. If you're going to smoke marijuana, you don't drive. One thing it does do, that a specific thing, is that it's known to force you to concentrate more on one object rather than seeing the whole picture, which obviously for a driver is not a good thing, okay? And the last thing on marijuana that I would emphasize is that it takes a long time to get out of your system, much more so than alcohol. So the standard amount of time is 2 weeks. So that's why, when you have a certain job, if you work for the city or a company that requires drug testing or whatever, people who smoke marijuana, and hopefully you're not one of them, they have to understand that if they're tested within 2 weeks after they smoke some marijuana, that could come up in a test, okay? The most common type of test that the police use for determining whether the driver is under the influence of alcohol or drugs is what's called the field sobriety test. And the field sobriety test is basically assessing your balance, your coordination, your eye movements, your concentration. So this is where they ask you to walk a straight line. They might ask you to do, touching your nose with your forefingers like that to see if you're coordinated. They might ask you to recite the alphabet backwards. There are different things that they do, okay? And the very last thing I'm going to say, and then we're done, and I'm sorry, this was a little longer than normal, but I had more to say. The very last thing I would just emphasize is that you got to know who you're getting in the car with. This is not just about you as a driver. It's about whoever is driving you as well. And there are just countless instances where a person who's perfectly sober and in every other respect is responsible, he or she gets in a car with somebody who's under the influence, a car accident takes place, and your life now is in danger, okay? So please, just make sure that, you're not getting in the car with somebody whom you suspect, even if you don't know, you suspect that person is impaired. Don't do it, okay? Don't give in to peer pressure. Be your own person and be smart, okay? All right, ladies, gentlemen, that concludes our lecture for today. Later today, I'll be posting the questions for the assignment, which, as always, will be due next weekend. So please get it to me by next Saturday, which would be the 30th of January, okay? Thank you, everybody, and have a good day.